I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. We've got a great show for you tonight. We're going to start out by talking a lot about affordable housing. We do talk about that in the greater Portland area quite often and the need for more of that. Tonight we're going to look at an existing program that encourages just that. It started 3 decades ago. It's a nationwide private-public partnership that gives tax breaks to owners who reserve a certain number of units for their low-income tenants and then charge less rent. It's good for business, it's good for people. But now, all these years later, some owners have the chance to take their building out from under those affordable limits, and some are doing that, which is terrifying for those who live there. And that's our big story tonight. The low-income housing tax credit is supported by the federal government and it's run by the state. It started back in 1986 and became permanent in 1993. It gave apartment owners a tax break that lasts between 10 and 60 years, depending on the specifics of the project. In exchange, they would reserve some of their units for low-income renters. It was a wildly popular idea. Developers built more than 50,000 projects nationwide and 3.4 million units. That's houses and apartments. But the deal has a timer running. And after the time's up, the owner can raise the rates for those low-income units all the way up to the market rate. And that's happening now in Oregon. The Woodspring Apartments in Tigard is an example. It had a 30-year deal that started in 1991. You can do the math. Federal regulations require that the owners let the residents stay in their homes for 3 years, but that time is up at the end of this year. The owner will then be able to increase prices, which is their right. That will affect about 70 units here. Lois Keck lives in one of those units. She moved into her low-income apartment 20 years ago. She is 80 years old.
It feels like I want to cry, because if they can't or won't, I don't know what we're going to do. It's just not right. When you have something that seniors can afford and you take that away from them, but you say we're going to build all this new development for homeless, why in the world are they sending us out on the street when they've got property that can, for a fraction of the money, keep us housed instead of letting us have to start all over again? I mean, at 80 years old, living there 20 years, I've said this before, but I'll share it with you again. It's not just taking my walls away from me. You're taking months of my life away because of the stress. I'm sorry.
You can really feel the heartache there. Lois says she pays roughly $1,200 a month for her one-bedroom apartment. She said the full market rate price at that place is closer to $1,800, which she says she cannot afford. Now, the renters recently asked Washington County for help, but were told the county's done everything possible. The owner apparently won't sell to the county or to anyone else. Shelley Perez is another renter. She and her husband waited 1.5 years to get onto a Woodspring low-income rental unit. She had no idea it was all going to change.
We have fallen in love with our neighbors, and they're not neighbors, they're our friends now. And we don't want to have to go anywhere. We want to stay there. But you can't when you can't afford it.
I feel awful for the folks who live there, worried about affording the rent increase or needing to find another low-income place to live. But I also worry about the bigger picture. A number of these low-income deals are starting to expire. Oregon Housing and Community Services estimates about 4,400 units will expire in the next 8 years here in Oregon. That's a lot of people and a lot of lives turned upside down. I feel like this is the moment that really I should be telling you why it's all going to be okay. But I can't do that. I'm not aware of any big movement to help keep the seniors at Woodspring in their homes. Same goes for the other 4,400 units still set to expire. There is one small program that will sort of help the folks at Woodspring. The legislature set aside $500,000 last year to help out. The State Housing Authority is taking half that money for administration and staff time. The remaining money will give each of the low-income residents a one-time lump sum of about $3,000. They can use that to help pay the increased rent when it goes up, or use it toward moving somewhere else. Now let's talk about Oregon's budget for a moment. And don't you roll your eyes at me. I saw that. This is fascinating stuff, and it involves your tax money. Last week, it may have gotten buried in the snow, but state economists announced their latest revenue forecast. They expect that lawmakers will have roughly $489 million more to spend over the next 2 years than lawmakers expected before the forecast. That's a big deal because, as usual, there's not nearly enough money to do all the things they all want to do. For example, Governor Tina Kotek said earlier she wanted to take about $765 million that would normally go to the rainy day fund and instead spend that on housing and other things. That new bunch of money might help there a little bit. But the more interesting issue to me is this battle over the rainy day fund. Kotek's a Democrat. The legislature's controlled by Democrats. So you'd think that's an easy deal, right? Well, turns out not so much. I had a chance to sit down with the top Democrat in the Senate who controls the budget, and I was surprised to learn she is not going along with the governor's plan. Her name is Elizabeth Steiner. She's a medical doctor, an independent thinker, and she calls herself a progressive who is conservative when it comes to your tax dollars.
Oregon has really healthy reserves overall. We have been very prudent as a state. We have something called the Rainy Day Fund, and we are statutorily required to put 1% of general fund revenues every biennium into the Rainy Day Fund. That fund is hovering around $1 billion right now. We also have something called the Education Stability Fund, and that's a statutory dedication of lottery fund, a constitutional dedication of lottery funds. I can't remember the percentage, but it's a lot. And that's also hovering at about $1 billion. Those funds are very important for protecting our budget in the event of a significant economic downturn, right? And we've been working very hard to build those funds up over the past several years, right? The governor has proposed withholding those allocations that are required first by statute for the Rainy Day Fund and by the Constitution for the Education Stability Fund, and using that money to balance the budget, to fund other things that she wants. I'll be honest with you, I'm troubled by that. I've told her this to her face. I'm not telling you anything I haven't said to her.
And by troubled, you mean it's a bad idea?
I think it's a bad idea. It is, however, something we need to be aware of.
But why is it a bad idea?
It's a bad idea for a couple of reasons. The first is, for the Education Stability Fund, that's a constitutional change and it requires a 2/3 vote. I think the chances of us getting a 2/3 vote is small, and I worry a lot about protecting that fund because you may remember after in the major recession in 2008, what happened to schools in this state, right? We didn't have a big, robust Education Stability Fund then. In 2012, which was my first year in office, when the school year started, I had first grade classrooms with 36 kids in a classroom. Algebra classes with 45 kids. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think any teacher, no matter how skilled, can manage 36 first graders in one classroom or 45 algebra students in one classroom. It's impossible. We have to hold on to that money to prevent anything like that from happening to K-12 education again in the future. We cannot predict what our economy is going to do, and we owe it to the people of Oregon to be financially prudent and to be good stewards of their money to make sure our kids get a great education. So that's a huge problem.
And it seems like the past legislatures worried about this very thing, which is why they made it hard to make the change.
That would be 100% correct. The Rainy Day Fund, we are allowed to change statutorily because it's statute. We can change statute. I don't think it's a good idea for analogous reasons. The Rainy Day Fund, just like the Ed Stability Fund funds K-12 education, the Rainy Day Fund funds Medicaid. It funds the Department of Corrections. It funds our troopers. The fundamentals, the safety net of this state. Yeah. And if we go digging into it for things that are interesting, great, cool ideas when we're in great shape economically, but are nice to haves, not need to haves, as somebody who's pretty fiscally conservative, I struggle with that. And so I think it's important for people to understand that we may have to make some really tough choices this year because we may not have all the resources the governor assumed in her proposed budget.
How did you end up running this thing? I could see a bunch of progressives going, wait a minute.
No,
Because you are a progressive, too,
I am
though.
a progressive. I am absolutely
you're a fiscal
progressive.
conservative, though,
yes,
huh?
I am a fiscal conservative because you deserve to know that your tax dollars are being spent in the most prudent way possible to get the biggest bang for every dollar that we spend, right? And furthermore, the people who depend on the services that the state provides need to have some level of confidence that the bottom isn't going to fall out from under them if the bottom falls out from our economy. Remember, need for services and revenues are countercyclical, which means that when the economy goes in the tank, we get less revenue because we're very dependent on income taxes. So if people lose work or are making less money, they pay less income taxes. Their need for services goes up because their income goes down. So we're paying out more money and getting in less money. That's not sustainable unless we have good reserves. So if I care a lot about not just the next 2 years or maybe even the next 4 years, but the next 10, I should care a lot about having really good reserves to maintain a steady level of services for the people who need them the most.
I told the senator she'd probably lose her budget writing job after this interview. She just laughed and said, no, everybody knows who she is and how she thinks. I don't know about you, but I do feel better knowing Elizabeth Steiner's watching over the state's budget. But what are your thoughts about the state and its budget? And what about this rainy day fund, the money that should be put in to sock away and make it even bigger? Should it be put in there or should it be spent like the governor wants? What do you think? Send me an email. Let me know your thoughts. The address is thestory@kgw.com. You can also call and leave a voicemail. The number is 503-226-5090.
Up next on The Story, a recent economic analysis of downtown Portland was not pretty, and you had plenty to say about why.
It starts with the basics. People don't feel safe downtown, and that's why people don't want to go downtown Portland.
And when it comes to solutions to get more people and money flowing through the core of the city, many of you want remote city workers to return to the office. And more will be coming downtown in just over a month. We'll tell you what's changing and why it's likely not the big fix that many of you want. That's when The Story returns.
Let's talk a little bit more about the city of Portland. Last week, before the snow, we brought you numbers from the economic consulting firm Eco Northwest, their state of downtown and central city. And it's not pretty. Multnomah County lags behind in job growth. The county lost $117 million estimated in income that migrated to Clark County between 2019 and 2020. Part of the reason? Taxes. They're just lower in Vancouver. And when it comes to downtown, there's now more than 8 million square feet of vacant office space in the central city. That's a lot. Foot traffic is nowhere near what it was before the pandemic, especially among workers in downtown. People are visiting downtown and other areas near the core of the city, but those numbers are still down from before COVID. And those are just the main takeaways. There was plenty more in our report, and you can watch it anytime, by the way, on the KGW YouTube channel and on our streaming app on Roku and Amazon Fire. It's called KGW Plus. But at the end of our segment, we asked you for your thoughts, and as always, you had plenty to say. Let's start with a message of hope, and just to be transparent, this was the only positive voicemail we got about the future of Portland.
I live in downtown Portland on 12th and Washington, and there are 3 brand new high-rises going up within 3 blocks. One is a Hyatt Regency Hotel. Downtown is not dying. It is changing. It will come back. It always has. It always will.
That's a great message. Thank you, Judith. Now, prepare yourself for the other side of the coin. Many of you flooded our inbox with messages like this one.
Hey, and as far as the recovery of Portland is concerned, and I know you'll never air this, but I can say it in 6 words. Portland is over because Portland sucks.
Well, there you go, Jim. We did air it. Now what do you think? Linda says, when I was young and my parents and I would travel to Portland, the city was so vibrant. For years, I worked in downtown Portland and I loved it. Visitors would say how clean our downtown was and how friendly we were. She continues, recently I was driving into the city and had to call 911 to report a homeless tent on fire. I see buildings with windows boarded up, I see the homeless, and I don't see people downtown anymore. It's like seeing a body with no heart and soul. It makes me sad. And among your comments about the decline of this city, there was a common theme: safety.
It starts with the basics. People don't feel safe downtown, and that's why people don't want to go downtown Portland. It's sad, but unfortunately, this light on crime stuff, from vandalism to breaking windows, people don't want to go down there. And if people don't feel safe, they're not going to go. So it's not rocket science. It's pretty simple.
John says homeless, mentally deranged, and drug-addicted people are acting out and are boldly aggressive in the obvious belief that there's no restraint. There's no fun in going downtown when I have to keep looking over my shoulder to judge the threat posed by others.
Here's my take on it. It doesn't feel safe to walk around in the city of Portland. I used to do that all the time. And toward the end there, people would accost me and badger me, try to hit me up for money. And secondly, people work from home. So I think those are the 2 reasons. I used to teach leadership and diversity, and I said the 4 values that drive workplace behavior are safety, 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 and safety. Physical, political, emotional, and spiritual safety. So in the context of the city of Portland, people do not feel safe.
And Steve brought up another point that so many of you made, the work from home aspect of an empty downtown. Eric said, how about reinvigorate downtown? We require city, county, and metro employees to come back and work at the office. And Michael echoed that. The city of Portland and the state of Oregon should lead the way to reviving downtown by requiring their employees to return to work in their downtown office space. Downtown will never recover until office workers return and support the restaurants and stores that are trying to survive. Those are solid points, and this is a topic that we've covered extensively on the show in the past. Here's where things stand on that right now for city workers. The city employs around 7,000 people, and according to the mayor's office, 40% of those are currently working a schedule that only requires them to be in the office 1 day a week. That's around 2,800 people. The other 60% are fully in person, with a small number of people working from home all the time. But starting in April, so just over a month from now, the mayor, Ted Wheeler, is requiring those 2,800 hybrid employees to work in the office at least 20 hours a week. So half the week they can work from home, the other half has to be in person. Workers will be able to ask for an exception, by the way. In addition to that requirement, Wheeler is expected to present a plan to the council that would require anyone working for the city in a hybrid or remote job to do so from Oregon or Washington only. Can't live in any other state and work for Portland. And there hasn't been much discussion on Wheeler's plan lately, but ahead of his announcement, there was a firestorm of protest last summer and into the fall. In this Willamette Week article, they talked about a letter sent to the city from 70 employees that said they should not be brought back to work to revitalize downtown, calling it inappropriate and not an essential part of our job. And during a meeting a couple of months later, one employee asked, why is it city employees' responsibility to rejuvenate a dangerous, unsafe downtown? In June, the city surveyed nearly 3,500 city employees. More than half who were working a hybrid schedule said remote and flexible work opportunities are a requirement for future employment decisions. Nearly 90% of the city's hybrid workforce said flexibility is a driver for their decisions about where to work in the future. And when asked about the ideal number of days to work in person if they can do their job remotely, 3 out of 4 people working a hybrid schedule now said no more than 1 day per week. But that's changing come April with that 20-hour minimum requirement. Will city workers leave en masse for other jobs? Will their 20 hours a week in person do anything to revitalize downtown? We'll be watching. And for what it's worth, according to the Willamette Week article from August, all of Mayor Ted Wheeler's staff works a hybrid schedule, but would not say specifically how many days they work that. We emailed his office last week to see if that's still the case. A spokesperson said the mayor's staff comes into the office at least 3 times each week, and that the mayor, Mayor Wheeler, works in person almost every day. Coming up next on The Story, we're heading out to the Pacific Ocean, where the delicate balance of ecosystems there is being disrupted by the sudden absence of a certain species of sea stars. Environmental reporter Cale Williams tells us what happened and what experts say needs to be done when The Story returns. Let's head to the Oregon coast to talk about a sea creature that is often overlooked. A mysterious disease started decimating sea stars in 2013, and they still haven't recovered. Now researchers from the University of Oregon and Oregon State University have started to unravel some of the cascading effects brought on by their disappearance. Environmental reporter Cale Williams explains.
The ocean is a complicated place where things exist in a delicate equilibrium. Take one species off the scale, and the ecosystem can quickly become out of balance. That's what happened when sea stars essentially vanished from the entire West Coast starting in 2013, due to a mysterious ailment called sea star wasting disease. The disease hit during a marine heat wave, and researchers are still working to determine what caused the die-off. But the impacts to other plants and animals, that's becoming more clear. One of the hardest hit species was the sunflower sea star.
It's big, it's the size of an extra large pizza. It has 20 arms, and it's a really big, voracious predator, especially of sea urchins.
Sarah Gravem, a biology researcher at Oregon State, says without sea stars to keep the urchins in check, their populations have exploded.
Those urchins eat kelp, and so they have just been mowing down the kelp forests, eating those kelp down to like nubs, and forming what's called urchin barrens.
Without kelp forests, young fish have no place to seek refuge from predators, and species like abalone, which eat kelp, have declined.
It's having cascading effects on like literally hundreds of species.
But until now, researchers haven't been able to directly link the die-off of sea stars with the dwindling of kelp forests. To do so, Gravem and fellow biologist Aaron Galloway helped lead a study of the animals, delicately collecting sea stars from the waters off Washington State to study how they prey on urchins. Over the course of several weeks, they watched how sea stars eat, tracking the animals using artificial intelligence, and finally put a number on just how prolific these predators could be.
Since we know that they can eat 0.68 urchins a day, that there was no number like that before.
And that number could help provide a solution to the problem of urchin barrens. Sea stars have shown few signs of recovery, but Gravem and Galloway said that if they're given the chance, the creatures could restore balance to the oceans off the West Coast.
Our only chance of really recovering at the scale that needs to happen, our kelp forests, is, I think, through like the natural recovery of predators.
Whether that means transporting sea stars from areas where they endured the wasting disease, or using captive breeding programs, Gravem said it's clear that humans need to step in.
I think at this point, if we don't intervene, it's going to be 50 years before we get these things back.
Cale Williams, KGW News.
Thanks, Cale. All right, keep sending your questions and comments to thestory@kgw.com. We're going to wrap things up right after this. Do you have a Roku or Amazon Fire? If you do, you can watch today's show, plus previous shows and segments anytime on our streaming service. Go to your Roku or Fire homepage and then add KGW Plus to your home screen. And then let us know what you think. All right, that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, the story, our story, well, that never ends.